G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now today I'm glad that I'm feeling just a little bit better than yesterday because of course we have a lot to go over. Of course we'll look at the maps, we'll compare maps, we'll show geolocations, but then on the maps I want to zoom in specifically on Chasiv Yar. Of course Chasiv Yar sits just west of the very important area of Bakhmut that we saw fall in 2023 to the Russian forces. But I want to zoom in on here because we see little gains, but why is this so important? So we'll look at the lay of the land, the topography of the land, where supply routes are, and of course where fortifications sit. Also, we need to look at what Zelensky's reply has been to then a lot of outrage from critical Air Force staff being transferred from the Ukrainian Air Force into the infantry and onto the front line. We'll look over strikes. One thing I will miss in those strikes is currently there are Russian Tu-95 long-range strategic bombers in the air and reports of missiles fired. That will have to be in tomorrow's video once it becomes more clear. We need to look at what one of President Putin's aides has said about the end of the war and also about Mr. Donald Trump then entering the White House. But where I want to start is with Mr. Oscar Jenkins, of course, an Australian who we did see the video come up last year of him being taken prisoner by the Russian forces. And I want to look over this article. I want to look at the claims being made, add my 2 cents, but I also spoke with Glenn, who this article is quoting and what he has said about it. And tomorrow, Glenn is actually going to speak with me about this specific situation, as this article has drawn a few conclusions without exactly everything in play. There's still a lot of speculation going on here from the media, from governments, and again, it's not particularly clear at this point in time. So we'll go over some of the article, and then I'll go over in this what Glenn has said to myself. And tomorrow, again, we'll have a quick interview with him that will add into the video tomorrow at some point. The execution horror claims about Aussie teacher now believed to have been dead for weeks. An Australian school teacher who fought for Ukraine before being captured by Russia was likely executed after being robbed by a gang of brutal enemy soldiers nicknamed Orcs. This isn't a gang of brutal enemy soldiers nicknamed Orcs. It's not like this is one specific unit. The reason Miss Alex Turner-Cohen, this is what people refer to just the Russian soldiers as. It's worth pointing out that Oscar didn't have any previous military experience and was living in China for almost a decade previous to this. He's 32 from Melbourne. He's presumed dead 3 weeks after the video emerged of his interrogation by a Russian-speaking man in the occupied Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. What is believed to be his body was discovered near a temporary prisoner of war camp, with gruesome theories emerging about his fate. Former Australian soldier and military lawyer Dr. Glenn, who there's a podcast with him previously from last year, but tomorrow you're going to meet, is in touch with another Australian in Ukraine's fighting forces. So Alex here has jumped to a few conclusions. And what I've spoken to Glenn is he has said there's a lot of speculation here. He said we can't and we shouldn't use the word executed at this point in time. We did also point out that at this point it is in Ukraine's favour to pin this on an execution and use inflammatory language for the informational war. But as far as what we know at this point in time, this isn't absolutely rock solid clear. So from what the Ukrainians are telling other Australians in Ukraine is that there is photo or video from a drone showing what is believed to be Oscar in a temporary prisoner of war holding area. But that said, this is yet to be confirmed because as far as I'm aware, the Ukrainians have not yet shown the Australians in country. It is also known that Ukraine has launched an offensive into this area. So some of the theories here is that maybe the tactical situation has changed and the Russians executed him during that change and maybe a quick withdrawal. Potentially he was caught in crossfire or maybe even sickness and had died in place. And what Glenn has said is at this point in time, we can't and we shouldn't say executed, but he was killed while a prisoner of the Russian forces. And that's an important thing to point out at this point in time, because no matter what has happened here, no matter what an autopsy will say, is that he was a prisoner in the protection of the Russian forces at this point in time. But what we don't understand, and we're all trying to wrap our heads around, is why was he held there for what looks like a month, because he is a high valuable asset, because he's a foreign soldier. These are the most valuable soldiers. Why then would he be in a temporary holding area at the front? And many have said, well, maybe he was killed weeks ago and has been there for weeks or up to a month. But at this point in time, Glenn has said, you're right, Willie, we actually do not know 100% the specifics. Glenn also did mention to me, well, the Russians until this point have not executed a foreign prisoner. So why would they now, especially while they are so valuable? But he did point out, and he will point out in this article as well, with the rank structure, there may have only been very junior Russian forces there at this point in time. So again, it's not 100% clear yet, but it is in favour to jump to conclusions here, but we will see. At this point in time, everything is up in the air. There's footage that is said to be a tattoo on his hand from a drone that shows that he is dead, okay? Then what has happened from there? Well, that footage hasn't been shown. We haven't seen that publicly. And at this point in time, we are not 100% sure. Of course, we'll go over all this tomorrow. The soldier claimed Ukrainians have taken drone footage of the body matching Mr. Jenkins at the area where the Russians were known to be holding prisoners temporarily. It would have been an execution. This is apparently what this Glenn, I can't pronounce his last name, has told news.com. We'll clarify some of this tomorrow. I don't want to put words in his mouth. We'll clarify this. It comes as Australia's Prime Minister, Mr. Anthony Albanese, has vowed the strongest possible action if it does indeed come out that Mr. Jenkins was killed in cold blood. But remember, at this point in time, we do not know this. People think it's highly likely that this is the case, but in a court of law beyond reasonable doubt at this point in time, we have a video said to be seen by someone, said to have been showing this. We haven't seen it. Apparently, the other Aussies haven't seen it at this point in time, and sure as shit, the body hasn't been in an autopsy yet to have seen exactly what has happened. Anthony Albanese, of course, Australia's Prime Minister, is vowing to take the strongest possible action. We call upon Russia to immediately confirm Oscar Jenkins' status. So, is he alive? Is he dead? Is he still a prisoner? What is going on? Our Foreign Minister said all options are on the table. Opposition leader Peter Dutton, who's running against the Prime Minister, has said we should send a clear message to Russia and to similar-minded regimes that Australians are sacrosanct. They deserve to be protected by the government, and if they are harmed in this way and brutally executed, as seems to be the suggestion in this case, there should be a strong reaction. And this is what I'm trying to say, is I think everyone needs to take a step back on this until there is absolute confirmation on this. Maybe these people with clearances know more, but at this point in time, it is not known. And we did say in the beginning, for the informational war too, it is in favour to use inflammatory language such as execution. Do I think that's likely what has happened? Potentially. But, again, beyond reasonable doubt, with something as severe as this, with complete governments caught up, maybe take a step back, but no one takes a step back. Our Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister has said if Russia has engaged in some egregious and illegal action, then it must be now the catalyst for action. So you can see why this is in favours. Nothing less than the recalling of Australia's ambassador to Russia and expulsion of Russia's ambassador to Australia would be sufficient in such circumstances. Of course, an advisor to President Zelensky, Mikhailo Podolyak, who we have shared on this channel a lot, has said, while we send our respects to Mr. Jenkins' family, we also hope that the global community will respond strongly to Russia's actions, particularly concerning the treatment of POWs. At the Foreign Minister's direction, the Russian ambassador was called to DFAT, so this is our Foreign Affairs, on the 13th of January to seek information and reiterate Australia's expectations that Russia will comply with its obligations under international law. The Russian Federation is obligated to treat all prisoners of war in accordance with international humanitarian law. So, it is important to point out, and you'll see this on a lot of the pages, the pro-Russian pages, that mercenaries are not protected under then the Geneva Convention, international humanitarian laws. Now, Russia see these as mercenaries. Others will say these are foreign fighters. And where the criteria sits in this, well, it can depend on a lot of what has been signed and the motives to go there. But what is important here, whether you disagree or agree, is that Russia see this as mercenaries. That said, mercenaries do not have the right to the combatant status or POW protections under the Geneva Convention if captured, but they are then treated as civilians, which means they can be prosecuted under domestic law for participating in the conflict. That doesn't mean, though, that you can execute someone. These, however you see, whether foreign fighters, whether mercenaries or something in between, they are still protected under the international humanitarian law. This is something that is just wildly said incorrectly from both sides of Wagner PMC, mercenaries or foreign fighters who have gone to Ukraine, or however each side see this. Regardless, is it's like you can then shoot them in the head? No, everyone, regardless of civilian soldier, whoever is protected under IHL. But some of the specifics on status under POWs, then no. Glenn said it was very unusual that a foreign legionnaire taken prisoner would be killed by the Russians, given the political value these hostages hold. We'll go over this tomorrow. Again, Russia does not see these as enlisted, they see them as mercenaries, therefore awarded not the same protections, but the IHL still goes under this. At this point, we do not know. It is drone footage, but without a video, it's impossible, and we haven't seen, without the body, it's impossible, and we have not yet seen the video. And some of the ones reporting on this haven't seen that either. And I will say, Glenn has not seen this footage as well, but he's been told through and through, but again, beyond reasonable doubt, we do not know. He said the Russians might have killed Mr. Jenkins because their tactical situation changed, meaning they had to make a hasty retreat. On the way, they've killed prisoners who pose a logistical liability to them. So if you have to then move out. Russia's military is known to have very loose leadership structure. It is possible some junior Russians without any leadership have just killed him. That's highly feasible. Again, there's many different speculation that it could be here. The disturbing video showed Mr. Jenkins' capture and subsequent interrogation. They asked about his bank details. Maybe they robbed him and they killed him. Another insider claimed news.com that the Australian school teacher is believed to be dead for weeks since the video first even emerged of his capture. So this is another spanner in the works here, as there are some saying, oh, we've known he's been killed for weeks. So again, it's so much in this. I wasn't actually going to speak on this until more came out, but tomorrow we'll go through it more. A person with knowledge of the matter, who did not wish to be named, told news.com that Russia hasn't been able to locate Mr. Jenkins from the day the first video emerged on December the 23rd, and has never been able to confirm proof of life since the Australian government first started making overtures. The source feared Mr. Jenkins had been dead since the end of last year. It comes as it was revealed Mr. Jenkins has been missing for possibly as long as 4 months. An American soldier who previously served alongside Mr. Jenkins in Ukraine's armed forces said that he had been identified by a tattoo on his hand. But at this point in time, I do not believe that many people have actually seen this footage. During the identification process, they used the tattoo he had, and it was shown it was him. He had the word vegan tattooed on his hand. A Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, said that last month, Jenkins may have disappeared as far back as August. Source said that Russia might have wanted to make an example of Aussie soldier to dissuade the foreign fighters from taking up arms for Ukraine. But what we have said is so far this has not occurred, and we have seen those valuable prisoner swaps as well. Why would it be taken place now? DFAT said it holds grave concerns for Mr. Jenkins. So look, my thoughts and prayers are that Mr. Jenkins is okay and that there is proof of life. But I also say, with everything in this, with how murky the fog of war gets, maybe just wait and see and look where things may end up happening, and hopefully the truth will come out in time, and if people are accountable, that they are then held to account. Okay, let's go over the strikes, and as I did mention, there are Russian bombers in the air at this point in time. Now, we spoke about the Engels oil depot was on fire, and this is a damage assessment that MT Anderson has put up with 6 tanks damaged and 2 active fires. Now, one thing we always say about oil depot footage is the footage can look more spectacular than the damage. Now, what we believe is being held here is a lot of fuel for aircraft. Many are saying for Tu-160s, and for the tactical situation strategic, I think it's hoped that it's probably not the Tu-160 because they're being used only a few times during this war. Tu-22s, Tu-95s can replace what the role that more expensive and rarer aircraft can take at this point in time, but believe that the 6 are damaged from this footage, so maybe more will come out, but that is what we are believing at this point in time. Now, Turkish news has put out this from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday. He accused the United States of planning a sabotage on the Turk Stream gas pipeline, which carries Russian gas to Europe via Turkey. So, of course, since the 1st of January, that pipeline crossing Ukraine running into Slovakia from Russia has caused a lot of issues. We've spoken about that, but of course that was switched off. Of course, the Nord Stream was blown up by, well, we do know, but But could there be sabotage on that other pipeline to further limit the money going back into Russia for that gas? The thing is, with these contracts, is even if that is blown up, the money still may have to go through on those contracts. He says the US does not tolerate competition in any sphere, including energy. They're recklessly endorsing terrorist activities aimed at undermining the energy stability of the European Union. Of course, the European Union is buying a lot more Russian. They are buying more Russian LNG, liquid natural gas, but they're also buying more American LNG too at an inflated price. They're encouraging their Ukrainian proxies to disable Turk Stream following the sabotage of the Nord Stream. Moscow accused US-backed Ukrainian agents of sabotaging. So did the German investigation, of course, a NATO and EU country. Lavrov said on January 11, the Kyiv regime, in order to cut the gas supplies to European countries, attempted an attack with 9 drones on a gas compressor station in southern Russia that supplies the Turk Stream pipeline. He said the drones were shot down by falling debris and caused minor damage. Most of the damage in this war so far has apparently been done by falling debris. Despite the fact imports to the pipeline have fallen, several European countries have increased their purchase of LNG transported by sea from Russia and the US, and there has been an increase in the spot price of gas also. It's worth noting Turkey is in NATO, but they're not in the EU. Turkey could see this as an attack. Of course, Ursula von der Leyen saw what happened to Nord Stream as an attack and said at the time there would be a strong and united response until more came there, and then it's gone into fade, it's gone to nothing. But I think that this could be likely see some sort of sabotage on this to undermine Russia's gas network. Although we could see that there are backfire consequences on this also. But of course, if gas is flowing through there, at least when it's flowing through Ukraine was getting a cut of that for transit fees. If it's going under the Black Sea, it's going through Turkey into then Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe. Well, Ukraine's not even getting a cut of that. So could we see an attack on that? Well, wait out, because potentially we could. I think it is likely that we may. Okay, let's look on the maps. Of course, we have the Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. I almost went backwards there. We have the red areas occupied since 2022, the purple since 2014, and of course the red check on this map, areas of which have been occupied over the past 24 hours. Let's have a look on Velika Novosibirsk. No, there's still this small island of Russian forces said to be out in here, but you can see there are some significant parts of red on this map today. We come down where is the Dashny pocket now. It was the Uspanivka pocket, but more Dashny pocket, that there is further development of Russians' positions through this area. We move just north of here. We have then the Pokrovsk front, and we have, of course, where Russia is making ground, then into Uspanivka, this Yasarove, this is coming under complete occupation as well. And remember, Surak has showed from Uspanivka down that all this is then occupied. I believe this will catch up in the next few days. But let's zoom in on Pokrovsk, and then we'll make our way up as we go. And I'll show you some geolocations also. So Pokrovsk itself, what we said yesterday, and I'll just show you on this map, was that the Deep State didn't show that this road, Deep State showed this road was cut off, Surak didn't. So Surak has updated his position to show that one of those logistics roads, one of those main logistics supplies at Pokrovsk, has been cut off. Now, on the east here, we see what we believe is going to be the eastern flank. Now, Surak did claim yesterday that the Russian forces were up to and potentially physically cut this intersection. He has then clarified his position on this. The situation in the area was clarified, has not yet established himself on the H32. The section east of the crossing and the flyover remains in grey zone. So it's in grey zone, but the Russians have not cut off this yet. Thank you, Surak, for clarifying your position. Sorry, we missed down in Kurakhove here. So see where this red check is that we spoke about, that Surak has some changes on here. Sorry, this is the whole Kurakhove front, the Andriivka front line, that there is then further movements out to Andriivka, somewhat as we showed yesterday, but he's confirming as well where we did believe there was a Ukrainian attack back in here, taking back some positions that this map showed yesterday, so we can confirm that as well. And before we get into Chasiv Yar, let's move our way up, and I want to talk about then the Pishani front in here, of course, heading towards Kupiansk. And we do have some geolocated footage today that shows then a different position on the map. So if we just look here, this Kolesnivka right in here, and it's as close to where just between this tree line, just on the beginning of the green here is where that is. So we're talking a little bit behind the line, but we are talking in green. So let's say it's right here to here, about 1 kilometre. But if the Russians are up to there, it does paint that they are a fair bit closer to then Kupiansk down to here, and some maybe 10 kilometers. And what we can see from this is then a Russian national flag has gone up on the back of a trailer here in farmland. So more fighting in this front, this Pashani front, all the way to Kupiansk, and including to the northeast of Kupiansk in Dovorichnia. This is an area really, really to keep an eye on. Now, Bakhmut, we can see that there is advancement in Chasiv Yar in the south sectors here. Now, what is one of the things we say? Russia tends to have this paint by numbers before storming an area. Fabs, drones, multiple launch rocket systems. And look at this geolocation footage today. So just down in this sector here, it's close enough to that. But again, these are an area weapon. We see that Russia is launching multiple launch rocket systems in here. I don't know exactly the type here, potentially TOS, maybe Grad. I'm not 100% sure on this, and I'm not 100% sure of the date either, because some say it was today, but when I saved it on my phone, it put it back at the 8th of January, so it may be a week old also in the metadata of this, or whoever took it, maybe their date was set wrong in their drone. So again, I don't know. But why is Chasiv Yar so important? We see this gain here. We see this multiple launch rocket system potentially for storming of this area. And I just want to zoom out and show you a few things. So firstly is the supply routes in here that are very important. So this is basically Chasiv Yar. This is just south of here. And we see Konstantinivka, that basically it can then go around and outflank Konstantinivka, which is only 11 kilometers from here. This is almost in range of some of those multiple launch systems and is in range of things like Fabs. So pushing on there and the ability to bypass. But further, we see from Minograd, this is Pokrovsk, just to the west of Minograd, to Toretsk and Konstantinivka. I've done some circles of where there are major supply routes. This is why yesterday I said this front is very important if Russians have met there, but also this intersection to run things down into areas like Toretsk or down into areas around Kedemik. This is a very, very important front that, of course, can drive a wedge between Konstantinivka and Kramatorsk. And politically, informationally, Kramatorsk and areas around here, such as Sloviansk, Konstantinivka, are very, very important also. But there's a few more interesting bits on this. So this is from Mr. John Helen, J_Helen on Twitter. You should go and give him a follow. I've put out where Chasiv Yar is on this, and you can see where Kramatorsk is. You can also see where some of the major fortifications are either coming under control or have come under control, but also how these get thinner and thinner the further west pushing out from here towards Kramatorsk as well. And when we look at those fortifications, we need to look then further on where the topography of the ground is. This is Chasiv Yar. This is Kramatorsk. You can see by the capture of this, then Russia will have the high ground in here. This is why Bakhmut was so defendable for the Ukrainians, because they held this high ground, what does a lot for your artillery, mortar, gun positions, that they can sit in this slightly lower ground here and have what we call defilade fire, which means they're very difficult to hit, but you can still fire out due to the trajectory of these. That we can see because of these hills, you can have your guns and safe dead zone behind this, and the trajectory can be hard. You may need to use things like mortars. So Ukraine did have the artillery topography advantage when Russia was fighting through Bakhmut almost 2 years ago at this point, and Russia getting that high ground will have this right down into those other areas, which are becoming a lot closer and in range. So of course the guns aren't directly on the front line, but if then Russia is able to move and push beyond this and the guns get into here, they will be in range of here and in more protected positions. So you can see from a graphic here, and these are a graphic of then some Soviet weapon systems as well. So it's just worth pointing out this is all very important. And then we look further, zoomed out a lot on then the topographical map. You can see Chasiv Yar is approximately at the end of my arrow. You see where Kramatorsk is, but it's also the high ground leading all the way through to Dnipro as well. So don't underestimate just that 1 kilometre square in one area can be significantly more important than in another area. So it's worth pointing out that and keeping that in the back of your mind when you are yourself analysing the situation and what is going on here. Now, we've heard a lot and confirmed a lot about then trained people from the Air Force, both working on aircraft and in air defence, being transferred into the infantry because Ukraine does have manpower shortages. It is known that. I'm wondering how bad it's going to get until people start either signing up or that people's audience start going, well, why are you not there fighting? So let's just look at this first. Of course, the US has called multiple times from both the Biden administration and now the Trump administration for Zelensky to lower the draft age back to 18. And Zelensky has said our partners couldn't provide military equipment for the 100 brigades already on the battlefield. But pointing out then, if you can't even give it for this, why are we going to raise new brigades? But the US on the other side of this is saying, well, send us men and we will train and equip them. So what I'll say is this is a two-way street, Mr. Zelensky. As I say, I think Zelensky's trying to shift as much blame as possible because I think we may be nearing the end of a settlement which may not go in his favour. But Ukraine is not meeting its replacement of men either. Some will say that's because of arms. It's because of a lot of things. It's because of poor command decisions. It's because their situation on the battlefield. It is slightly because of delivery of munitions too. Do not discount that is a factor in this, but it is not the sole factor in this. So this is one of the things we see coming out from a Ukrainian page. The aviation technical personnel, the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, have been performing our responsible mission on the MiG-29 fighters for over 10 years. However, today we face a real challenge that could jeopardise not only the ability to perform combat missions, but also destroy the very foundation of our aviation. Our unit received a telegram about the transfer of almost all technicians to the infantry, which means that we will be left without the technical personnel who serves our aircraft. Previously, 250 people have been taken away. Now they plan to transfer another 218. The technical staff is also being destroyed, and without us, the aviation will not be able to function. So at the end of the day, infantry is the most important to keep men in, and if you are short on men, you will sacrifice other areas to draw them into this, and that I think gives us an idea of how critical these manpower shortages can be. We'll go over what Zelensky has said about this, because Zelensky then talking about this can confirm that that was happening. Over widespread panic, outrage from the transfer of the Air Force from technicians to infantry roles, Zelensky announced the latest video address that he's directed Air Force leadership to avoid reducing the number of specialists. He said, I commend the President's decision. However, I'd like to say that this is yet another instance where his personal intervention was required to address a systemic issue. As I've highlighted before, this problem originates from persistent incompetence among senior military leadership. Of course, this has a huge effect on manpower too. The need for decisive changes at the top levels of command is long overdue. We've spoken about this again and again. I've instructed to ensure that the number of specialists needed by the Air Force to carry out combat missions is not reduced. But we do know that this has been occurring for some time. He had a conversation with the commander of the Air Force. There's a lot of information, outrage and discussion to ensure the number of specialists needed by the Air Force to carry out combat missions for aviation, air defence and mobile fire groups is not reduced. So the number needed, but they still may push some around. But if pressure on Ukrainian forces in manpower numbers makes them they have to move specialists from these roles into the infantry, Russian drones and missiles will have more effect on target. So the Russians will want to keep pushing in areas, try and make that manpower as acute as possible, because at the end of the day, you have to have infantry. If that means sacrificing a MiG-29 or an F-16 going up in the air, so be it. You're going to have, that's the first and foremost, is the front line. These are all assets that support the infantry, but the infantry is the one physically holding that line. Now, this is from the Ukrainian General Staff. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine officially reports that it was not and is not planned to transfer urgently needed specialists of the Air Force Engineering and Aviation Service who serves aircraft to infantry units. Instead, the Air Force of the Armed Forces is increasing the number of technical and flight personnel. At the same time, certain categories of personnel of the Air Force, as well as other branches of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, after preliminary training in training centres, strengthen the ground forces, airborne and assault units. As the situation on the front is not easy, in many areas there is a shortage of infantrymen. The decision to strengthen the ground strengthen the ground brigades on the front line at the expense of servicemen from other units of other branches and branches of the armed force of Ukraine is a forestep by the military leadership to strengthen our defence. So again, because there is a shortage of infantrymen, this is from the Ukrainian then General Staff, because of this, there will be other branches go through some level of preliminary training and put in ground forces, airborne or assault forces. So we do know that this is happening. And what I will say about this is, because we know, say, the MiG-29s are an older Soviet aircraft, that Ukraine is now getting the F-16s in, and the losses of those aircraft are not being replaced. If you're a technician on this and there's only a few aircraft, eventually your time may be limited and you're in the forces, you may be transferred. So I think we will see more and more of this, but if air defence and including aircraft start then moving to the frontline infantry, what we see as a byproduct of this is we will see an increase in the effectiveness of the Russian drones, like the larger Garand-style drones, and also the effectiveness of their cruise missiles. So this bloke, this Nikolai Patrushev, who is an aide to the president of the Russian Federation, of course, President Vladimir Putin, he has done an interview with Russian media, and there's a few bits in this I want to go over and add a bit of context to. The question: representatives of the new US administration, in particular the advisors appointed by Trump, admit in some of their speeches that Russia will under no circumstances cede to Ukraine or anyone else the territories they have already become part of the Russian Federation. He says this is not up for discussion. The territories that were once governed from Kyiv became part of Russia based on the expression of will of citizens in accordance with international law. And I want to skip then to paragraph number 3, and then we'll come back to what I want to say about this. It's also important the world recognise the inclusion of the DPR, LPR, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol, which are an integral part of our country in accordance with the Constitution, into the Russian Federation. Now, what I believe he's getting at here is the right to self-determination under the UN Charter. Although many question the legitimacy of the voting in these areas, as Russia does not occupy, except for then Crimea, 100% of these areas, although has taken that under then their own ground through these votes. It also doesn't take into displaced people, someone that lives in Kherson or Zaporizhia or Crimea who has moved due to the war, who should have been able to cast a ballot in this. Further, under the right to self-determination under the UN Charter, what is to do with state borders is a grey area. So this is, from my reading on it, very difficult. So let's just take into account like Donetsk Oblast in purple here, okay? Let's say there's a vote to right self-determination. You can do this self-govern, okay? But the grey area on the UN Charter is, but does that come under Russia's border or does it come under Ukraine's border? And there's arguments both ways on other areas around the world that have had then votes that have gone in the way of self-determination and self-governance. So this is something that I think we could maybe see at the end of the war, is votes for self-governance, self-determination, and see where that ends up fitting in what the people here feel as well. But again, the factors I brought up about percentage occupied, displaced people, legitimacy of voting, of course there'll be questions in this. He continues, as for the Russian line on Ukraine, he said it remains unchanged. It is important for us that the tasks of the SVO, we're referring to the Special Military Operation, be solved. They are known and have not changed. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly named them. And the number one constant here in this is that Ukraine doesn't join NATO. And he says that remains unchanged and it's named, and that's not going anywhere. What is in particular disturbing is that violent cohesion into neo-Nazi ideology and rampant Russophobia and destroying once prosperous cities in Ukraine, including Kharkiv, Odessa, Nikolaev, and Dnipro. So, spoken of this, because there is resistance against this and whatever, this is why these are being destroyed and the missiles going in and all of this around it. And of course, one of the other constants in here, but it's immeasurable, is the denazification that Putin goes on about. And one of the things in this is that can be sold as a victory or a failure either way, I think fairly easily, because it's so difficult to measure, unlike NATO, yes or no, territories, yes or no. So I think that will be sold as a victory either way. But he also said it is possible that in the coming year, Ukraine will cease to exist altogether due to the destruction in these areas and, of course, under then what we see here about the inclusion of these fronts. But if we want to talk about specific prospects for further developments, taking into account the Trump factor, we respect his statements. I believe that negotiations in Ukraine should be conducted between Russia and the United States without the participation of other Western countries. So he's saying it should be exclusively Russia and the US. He says there is nothing to talk about with London or Brussels. The EU leadership, for example, has long since lost the right to speak on behalf of many of its members, such as Hungary, Slovakia, Austria, Romania, and some other European countries interested in stability in Europe and taking a balanced position with respect to Russia. And this is the problem, because you've got, say, Brussels with EU leadership and so many countries in that see things so differently, it's difficult to speak on behalf. Like, it's hard for Macron to speak on behalf of Fico and vice versa too. This is where I think the weakening of the EU is going to happen in the next decade, potentially increase after the end of this war, because it's just so divisive, from your traditionalist Eastern European to your ultra-progressive Western Central European countries that just don't see how they can play ball. And furthermore, it's, you know, like if Germany had their own currency, the Deutschmark, it would be significantly inflated, because the euro is dragged down by other nations and a lot of money leaves Germany and is going into other areas. I heard this a couple of years back from a blogger I watch, and I thought, are you full of shit, about his prediction over the next couple of decades is the EU will collapse. And the further I see this, I don't think it's going to collapse, but I think the amount of countries in that at the moment is going to reduce. Where do those other countries go? Like I said, if you're not a major nuclear power, you have to be in part of someone's economic and military alliance. Geographically, they're going to either float under Turkey or Russia. So it's going to be very difficult. He says there, but this, of course, is playing politics to further divide the EU. But Russia's influence on this, there is influence there, but it is limited. The primary influence in division in the EU is internal, not external influence in. It's internal. Things like migration, things like the euro, things like marriage rights, LGBT, all of this, gas, energy, this can be influenced by Russia, but I believe most of it is internal. If you want to talk about US division, it's, other countries like China may have some influence on that, but 90+% of it is internal between the parties. Maybe there's some pushing on it, but how effective is it? It's not more effective than the Conservatives not seeing eye to eye with the Liberals. Okay, legends, you have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.